Hey, can you guys hear me? Awesome. Welcome, everyone. Right. Well, welcome to the first, well, not the first, technically it's not the first. We've been here before, but welcome back to Reading Group. I'm glad we got to start this again. How is everyone tonight? And feel free to hop on the mic. I am recording this. That way people who in other parts of the world that it's the middle of the night can also listen in and that sort of thing. Have a record.
Hi. How you doing? I was sick over the weekend. So
Oh no.
A little bit congested.
Oh, well, glad you were able to make it. And sounds like you're feeling better. So that's good.
I am feeling better. I do have to say that I laid in bed with a fever and listened to your sessions. I was like, I'm not sure how much is getting in, but I really enjoyed myself.
There we go. That's good then. Yeah.
This is my friend Mikhail. We are in a little co-op together.
Oh, awesome. Hi, Mikhail.
Mikhail, yes.
Yeah, it's great to meet you. Welcome.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, well, awesome. So did did you get the reading? Did you complete the reading? Okay. Or
no, I didn't. I just found out about it from Bethany last night and I'm so excited. And I got your email like 45 minutes ago about the reading and I've already ordered the book, but I don't have it. So this month I'm mostly just listening in and then I'll read afterwards.
That's great.
But yeah, I'm super excited.
I expected that it would be fewer people today because of the last minute nature of it. And I think we read and discussed this like almost a year ago. But I'm like, we're starting from the beginning because we have to. It's a word. So, well, welcome. So welcome to the reading group. So I just want to go over how we do things here. It's super laid back. There's no the goal is to inquire into a work together with curiosity and openness. And nobody's expected to have an answer or some, brilliant exposition or whatever. Like we want to practice the skills of the philosopher for those in the fellowship as we move into these works. And the main way of being is wonder and curiosity. And so my invitation to all of us is to suspend that part of us that needs certainty, that needs to know, or even that part of us that maybe feels like we want to be able to say something smart about it, or, whatever. It doesn't matter. Like, curiosity wins the day. And so there's a freedom in that, then we can just swim. And if we're just playing and being curious, then there's space to explore, to notice, to wonder, to consider what it reminds you of, and inquire, what is this guy saying? What is he telling us about what it means to be an educated human being? So note on the way of being in the reading group. The other part of it is come as you are. A lot of people during reading group will bring a glass of wine or a glass of bourbon or coffee or tea. All of that's okay. We don't have any weirdness about just be yourself, enjoy yourself. It's kind of like book club, with a little bit of extra. So sometimes we'll read some things out loud together, but mostly we'll discuss, we'll share our experience, we'll ask questions, and we'll look at the text and see what the text has to tell us about it. And so through this time, part of our hope is also that we become better readers, that we begin to grow in our capacity to notice what the author is saying. And so the other element of it is, and that there'll be a seasoned classical teacher, somebody who's had some experience with the work before, maybe sharing some of their experience, specifically like embodied, like where have they noticed it in their life. But by no means is it like a lecture. It's just like, hey, I'm kind of leading the discussion here and offering my thoughts as we go along. But it's very a loose sharing, a more embodied, like collaborative sharing. So that is the vibe. That's the structure. And then we work through the work. And if we get to the end, cool. And if we don't, that's okay too. We can't possibly talk about every idea or sentence in here anyway. So we get to free ourselves up to explore what we come to and be at leisure in it. Okay, so with that said, one of the things that's really helpful, just a couple reading tips as we're moving through it, is whenever you're reading an expository work, and works of philosophy are kinds of expository works, it's helpful to know something about like the question the author's asking. The text will tell us that. And so that's something, if we're coming to something brand new, one thing that we can be asking ourselves is, what kind of question was this person asking that even caused him to write these things? And now, to our benefit, we have an anthology here, and the title of the book tells us something pretty clear: The Great Tradition, Classic Readings on What It Means to Be an Educated Human Being. So we have a clue right away that there's something in here about being an educated human being that this speaks to. Otherwise, it wouldn't be in this work. So we have that to consider. But that, I just wanted to give that one tip. I won't. There'll be other tips that we come out and through our time together. But that was the one I wanted to start out with. Is when in doubt, ask a question. When in doubt, ask a question. All right. So with that, let us begin. Well, first, I wanted to ask, what stood out to you in the reading? Was there any? Well, today we're talking about Plato. I'll kind of frame it up, but today we're talking about Plato. He's the first section in the anthology. And there's a couple different excerpts in here. There's an excerpt from the Republic, and then from the Laws. In the Republic, one of the things that, and one of the things I love about this particular anthology, is that it gives an intro to Plato, the author, his time, and then it gives an intro to the works. So that's another tip for reading anything, and is a grounding moment with the work. Like, who is this person? What's their name? What's their favorite color? You got to know something about them. Hi, welcome. Knowing something about them, placing them, it's grounding, and it helps you know a little bit more about how to relate with them. And so he includes it right in there. So perfection. And then we have the section on the Republic has, he references that it has a lot to do with questions about justice. Hi. Questions about justice. And then, and in the Laws, the nature and purpose of Paideia, which I love because it's the word. So, okay. So let's open it. The first question I wanted to ask was, from the reading, was there something, or what sections, is there something that really stuck out to you that you're curious about, you have a question about? What stood out to you from the reading itself?
Sorry, I actually haven't read it yet.
Oh, that's fine. Yeah. I have plenty to share that stood out to me. I have all sorts of notes in my margin. You guys will be asking me to be quiet by then. What about you, Bethany?
Okay. Sorry about my technical difficulties. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So I've never read any of Plato ever
Oh my
before.
gosh, tell me about your experience. Okay.
I was not familiar with how he writes.
Okay.
So it took me some time to get into and become familiar with the back and forth. And now by the end of reading, I was telling Ryan that he needed to act up a second. No, say this, honey. After and we were just laughing about how, the person usually always agrees. Most certainly.
Certainly. Yes, indeed.
Anyway,
Most
so
certainly.
I had never just that back and forth, the conversation. I honestly felt like the way that it was written was very refreshing. Now, I know that this may be common for how they used to write back then, but to me, I don't even know whether that's true or not. I'm kind of making it up. But for me, it was really refreshing to read something that is not written in basically here is my first sentence. Here are the points that I'm going to make. And here are now the paragraphs that follow those points. So I found it really refreshing just to kind of hear someone share their thoughts. And it wasn't like this for me, and to my mind, it was fresh. It was new, it was different. So I really appreciated just even the framework, I guess you could say, of how he was writing. And I noticed that was different.
I love that.
It is something that I've talked about with Ryan lately about, some books these days that are more modern, they're kind of boring because they really say the same thing over and over and over. But this I felt like was really refreshing, and I really enjoyed the format of it. So that was my first observation, was just how he wrote in general. The next thing that I thought was really, maybe I shouldn't be so surprised, but how many things that I underlined that were things that I've come to learn in understanding education, like how much we actually pull, whether it's through Charlotte Mason or whether it's through Kevin Clark, like everything that I've absorbed. So many of those are like straight quotes from this. And I'm like, this is amazing. I had no idea. So I thought that that's interesting. The other thing, okay, this is not really with the actual text, which we can get there to like what I actually underlined, but something that kind of made me think is, as a Christian, and I'm teaching within the Christian classical tradition personally. And so I think it's fascinating that we're reading all these pagans or like polytheistic people, and we're really taking these great nuggets of truth. Now, I didn't agree with everything. His whole let's let the state educate our kids, and the parents shouldn't be involved. Like, that didn't thrill me. I don't think that's something that I would probably be on board with, letting the state.
You mean you don't have your altar to Athena in your house? I thought everyone had one.
I think that is interesting. It's an interesting idea that we pull so much, and I have not yet read a lot of these works and the literature that go along with these things. But I think that that's fascinating, that as a Christian, I can pull out the truth, like we talked about last week, that I can pull out truth that are these nuggets inside of there. And it doesn't matter that we have completely different worldviews.
I love the points that you made. So the first one, you talked about the form, and that's such a great observation. That's great reading. Like when we're reading anything, to notice the form up front. There's a reason Plato wrote in dialogue. Why did he? When we're reading a text, that's a great question to ask. Why did the author choose the form that they did? And what does that tell us about the kind of thing this is, and what experience we ought to have with it? And let's think about that for a minute. Okay, what could be the possible benefit or effect on us as people with dialogue versus a narrative or just a straight exposition? What comes to mind?
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, okay. you want me to go ahead? Okay. I think it's the form, the Socratic form, Socratic dialogue form that we read from Plato, from what I understand, is getting to the truth by asking the questions, so that the person who is thinking that he has the answers can actually go and think about his reasons, or think about why he thinks he knows the answer. So it's going beyond what he knows for sure by examining his truths, by answering the questions from the questioner.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, what I hear when you're saying is that it makes them think about their thinking.
Right. It makes them go beyond what they think they know already. And self-examination, I guess, not really self-examination, because somebody else is asking the questions. So by having somebody else ask the questions, they're actually thinking more in depth of what they think the truth is.
Right. I like that. Okay, awesome. What else?
So I was thinking, like, in terms of a play, and the ancient Greek plays, they I think they're survived for a reason, and this is kind of in the same format, or even why Shakespeare is so amazing. I was also thinking about movies, like, for some reason when we see something being played out on a stage or on the screen, it's almost cathartic in a way, because it helps us to understand maybe things we've even been thinking about, but because it's removed from us, it's easier for us to maybe comprehend it in a way. So those were my thoughts of why a dialogue might be easier to think things through.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Absolutely.
One of the things that I noticed at the beginning, especially, are all, instead of just telling you what to think, you ask the questions. And I think you talked about that when you mentioned in one of the Scholé group conversations, you talked about reading confessions and the importance of learning to ask good questions, and also the humility that you hear from the author, rather than just saying, this is what I think. When you pose it as a question, you're in a place of humility and also that curiosity and wonder. And so really, I mean, over and over, it's simply question after question after question. So that's something that came to my mind.
That reminds me of this one particular quote. I'm going to look it up. I think it's worthy. Well, I'm going to read it briefly, and then maybe we can put on the back burner, because I don't want to take away from the text that we're studying. Okay, but it's by a guy named Rainier Maria Rilke, from Letters from a Young Poet. And he says, be patient toward all that is unsolved in your heart, and try to love the questions themselves, like locked rooms and like books that are now written in a very foreign tongue. Do not now seek the answers which cannot be given to you, because you would not be able to live them. And the point is to live everything. Live the questions now. Perhaps you will then gradually, without noticing it, live along some distant day into the answer. And that makes me think of what you were saying, Bethany, about questions and the effect that questions have on our mind. It does, like, put us in this place of, I'm suspending my judgment, my drawing conclusions, and opening myself up to possibility, which, that's significant. The state and way of being, to be open to possibility versus, I know my answer, I'm concrete in this. And there's a time and a place for that, of course. And then there's a time and a place for openness too. So maybe, that makes me think and wonder, well, maybe this is the kind of thing that the invitation is, be open and curious. if the very form of the work causes us to kind of go in that direction, well, maybe that's the invitation in terms of our way of being. Like how, what's our way of being as we read this? Good thoughts. All right. Any other thoughts on like the form and how it's written, or questions about how it's written?
I did also have to say that because it's written in conversation form, I did find myself reading, when I read it out loud, it was easier for me to kind of sort through what was being said. I don't know if it's because it's a conversation, but it really did help me a lot. I heard it differently than
right
when you kind of get stuck in those long paragraphs and you're like, okay, what are you saying? But then hearing it was different.
Yeah. I mean, well, we're conversational beings. I think that makes sense. Yeah. Okay. Anything else from that?
Yeah, it seems like it was, if it's in a conversation form, it seems less confrontational, as far as somebody trying to challenge you in your views and trying to poke holes through your reasoning. It seems like if it's a conversational type of questioning and answer, it seems less confrontational. So,
oh my goodness, yes.
Maybe. I don't know.
Right. And to your point earlier, you were discussing thinking about our thinking. That makes sense that would be a better way of being, a better way of showing up in the conversation if we want someone to think about their thinking. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but I'm not very likely to be thinking about my thinking if I feel like somebody's confronting me and attack. I will feel a sense of self-protection, and that will be antithetical to openness and curiosity and considering my thinking. And, in the introduction to Plato, at the bottom of page 3, it says, education is the art of Paideia, of turning around. That's very similar to the idea of metanoia, the turning point, which is a very like tender place of humility, the experience of that. Interesting. Yeah. We're not even in the text yet. How about that? We're already learning so much about this. Okay. Anything else about the form? All right, let's dig into the Republic. So the Republic is hilarious, especially at the beginning. These characters are, I think Socrates is hilarious. He just cracks me up so much. But so we have a small section here. And well, I'll pause for a second. What stood out to you?
I do have to ask the question.
Yes, ask the question.
So people say that Socrates never wrote or communicated things outside of the voice of Plato. Is that correct in my understanding?
Yeah, Socrates. Yeah, go ahead.
I guess that's basically it. So in this conversation, these are not necessarily words that maybe they're ideas that they discussed together, or are these just mostly the voice of Plato?
There are different schools of thought on that. Some people even suggest that Socrates is a fictional character that Plato created to portray these conversations and ideas and all the things that he's portraying and saying. Others believe that Socrates was indeed an actual person, and Plato, being his student, just really knew him and knew these conversations well and recorded them, much like the Gospels might have been, recorded, telling the story of what Jesus said and did. So that sort of thing. Another thing to consider in this argument is, and in some, I can't remember which dialogue this is in, but Socrates had a problem with writing. To Socrates, writing was actually the new technology of the time that was corrupting the youth, in his opinion. And because by writing things down, you're not then required to memorize it. So he was not a fan of writing. He was like, no, this is the new technology. It's going to ruin the world, kind of like we are with iPhones. But that was the new technology then. And I mean, he's not wrong. Like, we can write something down so we remember it, right? But he had memory was a big deal to him. So he was against writing. So that would have been another reason for the argument that he was actually a person, but he would not write his stuff down, which then is funny that his student then writes things down. The irony. But so yeah. So that's what I know about that question. You're welcome. You're welcome. All right.
Okay, so about the content itself, I felt like I kept having to go back and remember what the intention was. It says, did you already read this? I can't remember if you read this to all of us, but in this book, what is differentiated is between true knowledge and mere opinion, and consequently true and false philosophers, which I think I laughed at the right spot on the top right on page 5, especially when I read it back out loud to Ryan. Do you want to read it?
Go for it.
For our friends. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So there are great.
Oh, do you guys have the file? I don't know why this hand motion means file, but for whatever reason.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Go ahead.
Okay. But I'll just read that. If curiosity makes a philosopher, you will find in many a strange being will have a title to the name. All the lovers of sights have a delight in learning and must therefore be included. Musical amateurs, too, are a folk strangely out of place among philosophers, for they are the last persons in the world who would come to anything like a philosophical discussion if they could help, while they run about at the Dionysiac festivals as if they had let out their ears to hear every chorus. Whether the performance is in town or in the country, that makes no difference. They are there. Now, are we to maintain that all these and any who have similar tastes as well are the professors of quite minor arts, are philosophers? Certainly not, I replied. They are only an imitation. Who then are the true philosophers? So good. Those, I said, who are lovers of the vision of truth. I could go on.
Yeah.
I loved that part. And then I love the part at the end of that page where they specifically discuss the person who has an understanding of the true beautiful thing, absolute beauty, in contrast to the one who basically has a relative understanding of beauty, where it fluctuates. There's no standard for beauty.
Yeah.
And then I really appreciated the metaphor of whether that person is a dreamer or is wide awake. And I love that he is wide awake, the person who has a clear understanding that there is absolute beauty or absolute truth.
Yeah, I love that too. What do you make of the dreamer part? One of the things that, did you catch, well, okay, so I'll go ahead and, so one of the things that this section, well, the next section it's getting into is the allegory of the cave and the divided line and all of that. And so one of the things that's cool about what he's talking about here is, this is my understanding of it. I could be wrong. I'm open to, being corrected on this. If somebody watches this later and they're like, that's not correct, correct me. I'm okay with that. But when you think about the divided line, like, so the divided line divides two main kind of categories of how we know. They're the lowest form, or I don't know if you would use the term lowest, but yeah, maybe, is images. So when you're talking about the dreamer state, about a mere opinion, the effect of knowing in that way is through images, almost like the moral imagination. Like, that's how I conceive of that part, is images are impressed upon my mind and I have a sense of something, but it's almost like this dreamlike state. Then the next level of knowing is physical, sensory. Like, I can know something because I perceive it with my senses. So the first is you're perceiving it with your imagination. So that, you know, so you perceive images and symbols and stories with your imagination. And then you perceive with your senses. So that's the faculty at work there, our senses, our five senses. Then there's the divided line, and it's the demarcation between, and things get much more abstract, or less abstract, but more abstract, as you cross the divided line. So you cross the divided line, then you go into reason. And it would be like the mathematical forms. And then it goes all the way up to the true essence of things. So like when Plato's talking about truth, goodness, or beauty, he's talking about these perfected forms. So a common example would be something like, if we talked about this coffee cup, there's the true coffee cup would be like the essence of it. Like, there's lots of different ways that a coffee cup can look, but somehow you know what it is. Or even a chair or anything like that. There's chairness, there's coffee cupness, there's like a sense of it. There's threeness, and you can have three expressed in a lot of different forms. But there's like this transcendent essence, eternal thing that when put in the container of an earthly form, whether it be the number 3, a physical manifestation, or even a painting of it, that would be an example of an image, we still get it somehow. Now, so the dream state is, like, we're closer to the bottom, which is why it's opinion, because you actually haven't encountered the thing itself. You've encountered a picture of it. So it'd be like the difference between getting the essence, like directly connecting with the essence of 3, or the essence of coffee cupness or chairness, versus looking at a painting of one. And so that's good. That's how he's conceptualizing how we know things, and the true knowledge, or the true knowing. You have true knowledge when you've reached that high point. And he spends a lot of time talking about it.
Is it safe to think about that, the true form being the original transcendent form of a thing? For example, there is a perfect form of a chair that's above that demarcation, and whatever it is that we imagine it to be in the bottom of that line is a representation. Now, representation cannot be, it's imperfect. There's some imperfections that is associated with that, because it's far, our own, because it's still too far from, we haven't encountered the real form of it yet in our knowledge.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's how I understand it, for sure. I like to think about it like, this may not be the right way to say it, but in an effort of me having you just exploring it, I like to think about it like divine blueprints, or the divine, it's and then I think about the stars, and then that makes me, it all just seems very celestial. Like it's up there, it's divine. So yes, 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 absolutely. Oh, and the what Plato says about the faculty that we have that perceives that is our nous, or I have, and I can send this to you guys after, but I have a helpful image. Oh, by the way, if you like all these charts and forms and different categories that all these thinkers have described in all these great works, this book, Medieval Literacy, a compendium of medieval knowledge with the guidance of C.S. Lewis, is a fantastic resource. But they have a drawing of the divided line in here, and I can send it to you guys, but it makes it really easy to conceptualize and see. So you're absolutely right. And that's the idea of abstraction, by the way. I'm abstracting from the original. So, I heard one guy give a talk about abstract art one time, and the point he was making, because there's some that will say, oh, abstract art is bad somehow. But if everything's an abstraction anyway from the true essence, then, if it's pointing to it, I guess maybe I wonder if that's the question. Is it how perfectly can I make it look like me if I'm painting me? Or is there a different question? Is it how aligned is it with the transcendent form? And if we're all on that journey, that raises for me questions like in creating art at all, like what is our responsibility as poets and artists and teachers, and how we embody things, which I think is one of the reasons why he is so hard on poets, because of the power they have to embody something and hold it in a space and then deliver it where it kind of just like goes past your reason. Like when you're looking at art, when you're listening to poetry, when you're listening to music, just goes in. You just almost like just this acceptance of it. That was a little off topic from what your question was, but.
Okay, can I have you clarify? So we were just basically talking about form versus the true form versus like the physical manifestation. Now, what he continues to go on talking about is that of knowing an absolute being versus the non-being and unknowing of something, and then that opinion goes in between, or is kind of like that in between. At least I draw it out like that in my brain. Now, can you tell me how that form thing that you just explained, is that the same thing, or are we talking about two different?
So, okay, yeah. So this is my theory on it. This is how I understand that. Well, first of all, before I share how I understand it, what do you think? Like when you think about the idea of an opinion, so you have complete ignorance, you have knowledge, and then you have an opinion. Like think about the experience of developing an opinion. What comes to mind in relationship to your question? And what does the text tell us about it? So both of those questions.
I was thinking about this in regards to the news.
Okay.
So news telling being telling what actually happened, what is a description of what actually is or was, versus the opinion doesn't just tell you what actually happened, but describes something in my more not fluffy, but less concrete, if you will.
Mm. Mhm. The opinion.
Yes.
Mhm. Okay, so less concrete.
Anyway, I don't know if I have any more to say about that, but I did try to think about this where it talks about describing what actually is versus
Well,
how you can't describe what isn't. Go ahead.
Mhm.
well, opinions can be, I don't know, opinions can be influenced by your experiences and your your perception, and your perception through your senses can be I mean, it can be flawed, right? It can be wrong, or it can be right. And so that's why opinion is probably the less farthest from the truth, because of those weaknesses, because of the weakness of wrong perception, biased opinions, experiences. So they have all those influences, and what your opinion might be versus what the truth is, which is void, or which is free of all those flaws.
Perfect. Oh, I love that. I love how you brought in our experiences and perceptions and things. Like it makes me, like how you can experience the same event as a person, and both of you have different stories of what happened there. Maybe it's my perception, it's the meaning I'm attaching to it. Yes, I love that. And okay. And this is like when in Plato's cave, where it's talking about, so the part where the shadows are on the wall and the people chained believe that the shadows are the reality. Like, this must be all there is because this is all I can see. Whereas as somebody is starting to come outside of the cave, they're beginning, so there's complete ignorance, but then there's this awakening sort of thing happening where all of a sudden they're like, wait, there might be something else. They don't know what it is yet, but there's this acknowledgement of a movement away from ignorance towards knowledge. So one of the things I think is interesting to think about, especially as it relates to education, as teachers, as we're teaching about this, is what is that threshold that we, and what do we experience in that threshold, which I feel like that's kind of what part of what maybe your question got to, Bethany, a little bit of what's happening in that threshold from ignorance and the movement into opinion. What's happening in opinion? What's happening in opinion from a learning standpoint? Like, is opinion a state of being where we're wrong, or is it a threshold that we must cross through in order to get to true knowledge? How I understand the divided line is that I see it not as a line you step over, but a threshold you cross. And as you cross that threshold, you are in opinion. And it's mess and mystery and kind of dark, and you don't really know, but you're feeling your way through it. And as you surrender to the wrestling match or the dance, I love, we'll get to that in the laws, but oh my gosh, I love that so much. As you surrender to the dance or the wrestling match, what happens on the other side is you come to then. And so I think, I think it's a question that we should ask as teachers is, is opinion a state that is wrong or bad? Like, something to avoid, like, oh, that's just your opinion. What if opinion was a necessary threshold, and that when someone's in opinion, we could celebrate it. We could celebrate it and be like, oh my goodness, you are waking up. You're starting to wake up. Hallelujah. And then and then how do we direct our students through a threshold rather than, well, let me just tell you the right thing to think, like, how would it change our teaching if we saw opinion as threshold, that we coached our students through a messy, mysterious process versus they're not believing the right thing?
Yeah. You mean instead of shock and panic? Like, no, that's not what it is.
Yeah.
Look around. Okay.
Mm.
That's hard.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard. I don't know. I think it will be, if I am confronted with that. My kids are still very young, but
Mm-hmm.
if I'm confronted with that, it will be, shock and panic. I guess that's why I'm here.
Yeah.
It reminds me of flexing into the other roles.
Yes.
Identifying basically obstacles that you may not say, but you can sense from the outside perspective, that you can see them there, or the almost to theirs. I think that this is hard for me, I feel like, because my tendency is to walk in more of that ego, I'm right, I'm mom.
Mm-hmm.
And putting that aside, to even say, I think you said this. My job is not to help you avoid the difficult trials, or in this instance, the feeling overwhelmed by opinion, or feeling lost, or maybe even that they think they have the right answer. My job isn't to keep you from those opportunities, but it's to walk with you through them. And I think that instead of avoiding them, which is, I think, probably what I would rather do, or I don't know if it's in some kind of like, I want to protect you, or I feel like if I can keep this from happening, then I'm actually under control or something. But I think that is a good reminder of remaining in that place of humility and being able to flex into, okay, let us figure out what those obstacles are and see how I can help you best navigate how to get through them.
Yes. Well, and it's like, it's also like the framework of the friendship, the play date, developing friendship, and then flourishing friendship, which is a framework that we talk about in the fellowship, to kind of frame out and give shape to what the journey that a student takes looks like. Whenever we learn anything, a friendship, a developing friendship, is a good metaphor to compare what that process is like inside us as human beings when we learn something. And if that's the case, that second stage, first meeting, introduced, complete ignorance of this person, and then start to get to know them. And if you actually want to become good friends, well, guess what? You get to spend time with them. You get to invest. You get to be vulnerable. You get to, do work. It's like, it's enjoyable, but it's also a commitment, and you pay a price. It might be a delightful price, and sometimes it's not easy. And most of the time, and maybe it is, I don't know, it depends on the relationship. But as a result of that, a flourishing friendship unfolds, as opposed to another way of looking at it, like, I'm going to dictate that at this point, at the end of this book, we're all going to love it. Like, that's not how it works. You can't just decide that somebody is going to be your best friend. I mean, when you're 5, you can't, like that intimate, deep connection unfolds because of how you invested time together, because of how you were vulnerable to each other. And I think that's, I love that they brought the question up in the text. Like, there has to be something between ignorance and knowledge. And what is that space? And it's that developing friendship. It's the friendship that's in the work. It's the hard work of it. It's the threshold. It's I don't actually know what's going on, but I know some things, which in some of other dialogues of Plato's, he brings up the point of like, it's at this stage, it's dangerous though, which is why they're talking about it, because you know something. And you can feel like you know more than you do. And so the temptation is to go ahead and draw conclusions and be like, oh, I've got it. This is it. But maybe not. And so then as a teacher, how do we, if you think about it in terms of the friendship, as a teacher, how do we coach, or as a parent, how do we coach somebody through developing a relationship, which is why we can't do it for them, right? Like, I could see them struggling in a relationship, but I can't just make it better for them. If they're going to learn the skill to do that, then they have to be the one to navigate that. And I can coach them. I could give them advice. I can be like, hey, when I do this, it helps me get through this kind of thing. When I say this to myself, or when I practice this skill, or I say, I can say a lot of things to coach them to navigate this thing that feels very messy and mysterious to them. And it will only be on the other side of them practicing it that they're like, oh, that worked. I see it now. But there will be no seeing it until they're on the other side of it. And we know this to be true for our own things that we've learned. What do you guys think?
Well, I'm thinking on that threshold, shouldn't there be should there be a desire first from the student's perspective to actually, listen and turn around, metanoia, to turn around and open himself up to possibilities, different possibilities from his opinion. So that desire, it has to be there first, right? But sometimes it's not. But so when it's not, what is our job as teacher mom is it our job to get them there? Is it our job even to make them desire it? Because it's personal. It's they have to have the desire, and they have to have that wanting to know more, or to know differently. Yeah. So my question is, how do we do that? How do we get them there? Or how can we cultivate that personal desire to turn around and to know what is true knowledge versus what the opinion is?
That's such a good question. Well, I would ask, well, what causes you to desire? Like, and we can all think about this. What are times that we have found ourselves really desiring knowledge, or can you reverse engineer that, or think back to what kind of like ignited your curiosity or desire? What does it for you?
A lot of times it's, a necessity for it.
Okay.
Like, for example, I desired to learn more about classically educating
Mm-hmm.
because I'm in this role right now to educate my kids, and that's how I want to do it, by following the classical philosophy or method. So whatever it is that I have learned before, my type of schooling from before, it's totally turned around and changed, and because I have that desire to know what and how to do classical education for my kids. So I guess there is a motivation for me to spend more time and to invest work for them, because that's what I want for them. So in one way, it's a necessity, and another way is one way is out of necessity,
Mm-hmm.
and also because I want more for my kids, right? So yeah. Yeah, I think that's it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, awesome. What about the rest of you? What do you notice causes you to desire?
So a couple of things comes to mind. One is what we talked about in the philosopher mode, is somebody else's excitement for a certain topic or a passion that they have, an interest that they have. It's enticing when somebody else is excited. I'm excited too. And the next thing that comes to my mind is a continual fostering of curiosity for your kids, even as they get to this stage where they are forming their own opinions, continuing to give them opportunity to explore new things, the feast, if you will,
Mm-hmm.
so that they too will learn to search for that feast on their own. And that when they're in that spot of that would come naturally to them.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other thing I think of, meal planning. I'm terrible. So sometimes I think just my own failures and my own, not failures, but the things that I struggle with lead me to try a new meal plan, or be inspired by a new food blog or something, that just simple wanting to be a better human, or try to be more hostish, if you will.
Yeah.
That does not come naturally. And so I feel like just my own areas of weakness cause me to want to go beyond that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like what you're saying about, and so I think it's so important what you guys are bringing up, because you're right. You can't make somebody desire, but one of the questions that comes, one of the questions that comes up for me when you're talking about that and asking the question is, who says they're not desiring it already? Like, one of the ideas is that in classical education, when it comes to like truth, goodness, and beauty, is that this is what our soul is nourished by. Well, and also, and there's some other points about it in the laws, but one of the things that I've heard, well, you know what, I'm not going to say that, is that we desire things regardless. And the way that it's presented to us and our own curiosity and our own, and then invitations that others give us awaken things in us in different ways. And so I'm really curious about, if a student isn't desiring it, why? Like, well, you know, that makes me want to step back as a teacher and be like, okay, first of all, why don't they care about this? And what's the difference between caring and desiring, and what's in the gap for them, and or do they even know that there is a gap? Because one of the things that I notice in myself is oftentimes I won't desire, when I don't desire something, I don't sense a gap between where I am and what this person is telling me. But then when my mind wakes up to, oh, there is a gap here, there's a distinction between what they're saying and what I'm thinking, all of a sudden I wake up a little bit and I'm like, oh, and then I like want to know. And so for me, when I don't desire, it's because I just don't see it. Like, my mind's in total ignorance. And so it's what he's saying here. He says, at the bottom of page 7, and therefore, so opinion is not concerned with either with being or with not being, not with either, and can therefore neither be ignorance nor knowledge. That seems to be true, but opinion is sought without and beyond either of them, in greater clearness than knowledge, or in greater darkness than ignorance. In neither. Then I suppose that opinion appears to you to be darker than knowledge, but lighter than ignorance, and also to be within and between them. Well, I'll stop there. So that there's this lightness, like a seeing that's connected with an awakening of desire. There's light that connects to an awakening of desire. And even in the allegory of the cave, one of the things that they talk about is there's people that need to go in there and drag people out. So where does that exist? When do we do that? What does that look like? And in the role of teaching, I don't know the answer to that. Like, when is it appropriate to just drag someone out of the cave? When do we wait for desire? Is desire for opinion, or is desire for the realm of ignorance? I don't know the answer to that, but that's what I'm curious about. Like, where is desire? I'm monologuing at this point and thinking, but is there, I am really curious about that. But I know that I desire truth, goodness, and beauty when I see it, but I don't always see it. Which is why we have the 7 liberal arts. They're the arts of truth perception. They're the arts of perceiving truth, goodness, and beauty, which is what our souls are nourished by. And as our perceptive faculties grow, we will see more truth, goodness, and beauty.
You know, I was thinking the same thing about the 7 liberal arts, what you were saying about how within each of us, we each have those things, and we all have the capacity to live them out, but they need to be nourished and to be grown, but it's equal for all of us. And so if we have those true desires within us, like you said, sometimes we need to be pushed or have something presented to us to help nourish those different areas.
Yeah.
I have to say, I've been having so many thoughts as we've been talking here. Just I can't remember exactly what it was said, but I did read the first page of the document you sent out, and there was a sentence that was basically, the concept is that this idea of being students along with our students, And I absolutely love that, because it kind of goes in line with something I've already believed very strongly, that you don't have to be like some master to be teaching your children. If you're learning along with them, that actually in and of itself can be something that can help them to get that desire to learn, because they're following your example, and also you're getting the education along the way. And that at what time they get to that point that they want to have more of a desire to learn more of that stuff, that's different for every person. But if you are exemplifying that this is important to you, then hopefully that will be a way to draw them out. So when they're ready, they'll be able to jump into the conversation.
Yeah. I love that you said that, because when you said that, it made me think of a memory of teaching my son math one time. And if I asked him on any day, do you want to do a math lesson right now? The answer would be no. Without a shadow of a doubt, it would be no. There would be no desire to do the math lesson. But once we were in the math lesson and we were working on a problem, and there was like this gap created between the problem that we were in and then creating the solution, desire was awakened at some point in the context of working on that specific problem for a moment, to see the truth, to see the answer. And then when he got the answer, joy. And he'd just be dancing while he's sitting, excited that he got the problem right. And then he's like, okay, let's do another one. And so it was like this little microcosm of it in that moment. But then when we were done, if I'm like, you want to keep doing math? No, he wants to go do something else.
So when you're talking about gap, the gap, so the gap of knowing the truth and the desire to know the truth, and that gap that happens there is the actual work that happens to get. Is that what you're talking about, gap?
Yes. When I say gap, I'm thinking I use the term gap and threshold synonymously with the divided line. I feel like they're all the same thing. I could be wrong about that, definitely, but that's how I conceptualize it and understand it as I hear Plato, Socrates describing it. And so in the gap, that is where desire is created, because the human mind hates not knowing. The human mind wants to know. If we create a gap for something like a question, that's why questions are so powerful. Think about this right now. You asked a question. So we learned some stuff. Then you had a question, and now you're like, oh, I want to ask this question. You have a desire to like cross a threshold that you didn't have before, because something was awakened and now you have questions. A gap was created and you're there for it because you want to figure it out. You want to know, you want to experience it. That's what happens in our students as well. And it's in that space of not knowing and asking questions and wrestling with different ideas, hearing it in other ways, playing with it in our mind, applying different tools to play with it, that we work with it, dance with it, wrestle with it enough that something begins to emerge. And the skills of doing that are taught to us through the 7 liberal arts, but it's simply offering a question that can create that for our students as well. Which is why, well, I'll pause there. So a concrete way of looking at it would be simply asking a question. And then in asking a question, people want to answer it. That's a way of creating a gap, creating desire of some sort. A question that connects with them. If the question's not landing, it's not a question they're asking. So what question are they asking that relates to this? Well, then that's also my role as a teacher. Can I discover what questions they're asking? How do I get to know them? And in that sense, I'm being a student of my students, getting to know them, finding out what they're curious about, what questions they're asking, and meeting them there.
Yeah, where did I read that or heard that before? I think it might be Charlotte Mason, that you don't answer if you don't answer a question that they're not asking.
Mhm.
Mason? I can't remember.
Yeah, I know that David Hicks says that. I think he's quoting someone else. But yes, that is a quote that is spoken of a lot in classical circles. I don't remember the original author of it though. Yeah, it's the mark of an ineffective teacher to answer a question before it has been asked. That's the quote. I do that all the time. I'm like, it's interesting to me. I just want to talk about it. I'm excited. Moments of effectiveness. Okay. Well, we could spend like 500 hours in the Republic. Anything else from I mean, I want to spend some time in the laws. Is there anything else that really stood out to you, Bethany, from the Republic reading that you wanted to bring up before transitioning to the laws?
Yes, actually.
Mm-hmm.
This is just my brain, but in the Republic is where he talks about the cave allegory,
Mm-hmm.
right? Okay. So I really liked the description of when the man ascends out of the cave for the first time, and how he's unable. He's first only able to look at the reflection of reality in the pool of the water. And then he can start looking around a little bit, and he can't even look to the sun itself because it's so bright. And then the disorientation that happens, either ascending and descending back, or descending above. Anyway, I really liked that. I liked what that was.
Yeah.
What that was saying. Yeah.
What did you like about that? What did it make you wonder?
Actually, it reminded me of reading this book and my first introduction to coming out and feeling disoriented. Like, okay, what are these things? What is the form of this writing? Who are the people having this conversation? You know, it feels disorienting at the beginning. And then, so I kind of felt like that was my own journey in ascending to greater knowledge for myself, was that place of just beginning to become orientated, and then being able to look more clearly. I definitely don't think I'm at the spot of being able to peer at the sun directly, but I appreciate that the journey, because I feel like that's what I took for myself.
Isn't it in the Socratic? So Socrates said also, you know, it's like the more you know, the less you know. You know, from what you're saying, Bethany, is like this man went up out of the cave to be confronted with the big, wide, bright world, and you know, it's disorienting, and he doesn't. It probably felt small, you know, in this newly acquired knowledge, but it's so much bigger than what he knows then. It seems like it's almost like it's being lost in this great depth of knowledge.
Mm,
The more you know, the less you know.
right.
And I think from my reading from Plato from a long time ago,
Mhm.
that's somewhere in one of the dialogues he said that. Did he? I can't remember.
I can't recall the quote exactly, but yes, yeah.
Okay.
I want to look it up now. Which dialogue did he say that in? But yes, I've heard that idea so much before, and I hadn't thought about the experience of being in the light that way before, and I really love that image. It's really helpful as an image, especially the word you use the word confronted, and I think that that's how it feels. You're like in the and it feels confrontational. Like yeah, I mean, to go from darkness to light, you're like, oh. And it actually makes me think of C.S. Lewis's essay The Weight of Glory, and he even talks about desire in there in the beginning, like how a boy doesn't want to do his Greek grammar. He's like, okay, but then the desire awakens or is realized when he's older and can read a whole work. But the weight of glory, or the weight of light, and even that verse, my burden is easy and my yoke is light, and whenever I read that verse, I think of light as actual light, not lightness of load. Almost like maybe there's something there, I don't know, but it reminds me of those things and makes me wonder. It connects to that idea of it being confrontational, that light is a burden, but a different kind of burden. I'm totally just putting my own interpretation on it right now. This is not in the text.
Can you tell me how to say your name? How do you
Avelina?
pronounce it? Yeah, Avelina.
Avelina? Is it?
Yes, Avelina.
Avelina. What you were saying about the disorientation and the confrontation. And then it makes me think of, as you come into knowledge, you also then have more questions, because then you question, what in the world was I thinking back here? Like, I thought that was my reality. So as I gain more, as I literally read more of this, I think, wow, like now not that I'm questioning my reality, but you,
I mean, there's space
have
for
informed, you have more questions about, like, well, why did I think that before? Or anyway, it causes you to examine that which you thought and what seemed like you were swimming in was your reality.
Rabbit holes, rabbit holes.
Or full circle. Like, what I heard her saying was going full circle back to what you were saying earlier, is it causes you to examine. And that's exactly what you were talking about at the beginning with the form of the dialogue, that the dialogue itself, the form of it causes you to examine your thinking. And then coming into the light also does that. So it's like a self-fulfilling form in that sense.
So I hadn't actually read that yet, what Bethany was saying, but it made me think of something I've been grappling with fairly recently. So just as a bit of a backstory, I majored in history in college and loved it. But looking back now, I'm like, I was like, what, 24 years old when that happened, and before my brain was probably fully developed, like, to comprehend this. And I feel like such a lack of things that I didn't learn. And I guess there's the choice now of like, well, that stinks that I didn't learn that stuff. Or I can understand and realize that this is a whole long process. Like the more, sure, I've learned so much so far, but there's still so much more to learn. And I'm excited about that, but it's very daunting to realize how much more is still out there, how much I don't know. And it just made me think of that when you were talking about like coming out of that cave, like that would be really overwhelming and confrontational, that feeling of being faced with that.
Yeah, and at first it seems, you get insecure. Well, you feel insecure.
Yes.
Right? Because you know so little,
Mhm.
you know some, but in the realm of things, in the context of things, you really know just very, very a slither of a bigger, wider truth.
Yeah.
And where do you even start? where do you even start? And where do you, what should you prioritize? And that's why, us also as teachers, we also need somebody to guide us and teach us and steer us in the right direction, because it's just so big.
Yeah. And I think that's a really great segue to the section that he has included in here in the laws, because he starts out the laws talking about that trajectory of learning and how we become virtuous. And he starts out, well, I'll read it. He says, according to my view, anyone who would be good at anything must practice that thing from his youth upwards, both in sport and in earnest, in its several branches. For example, he who is to be a good builder should play at building children's houses. He who is a good husbandman at tilling the ground. And those who have the care of their education should provide them when young with mimic tools. They should learn beforehand the knowledge which they will afterwards require for their art. For example, the future carpenter should learn to measure or apply the line in play, and the future warrior should learn riding or some other exercise for amusement. And the teacher should endeavor to direct the children's inclinations or pleasures by the help of amusements to their final aim in life. The most important part of education is right training in the nursery. The soul of the child in his play should be guided with the love of that sort of excellence, in which, when he grows up to manhood, he will have to be perfected. Play is what you prioritize. That's what Plato's saying.
I'm pretty sure Plato had read Charlotte Mason. I mean, isn't that straight out of her book? One of them? Sure.
Right. Oh my gosh, I love that you said that, because that is what we do. They're like, no one came before Charlotte Mason. They're like, obviously, Plato read Charlotte Mason.
Yes. No, but man, that people argue about whether she was thinking classically or not. And clearly, like, that is, I'm pretty sure she's got a paragraph very similar to that in one of her books. It's beautiful. And yeah.
That's what I love about Richard Gamble's anthology. He didn't know about any of these factions. I got to interview him. And actually, I'll see if I can find a recording of the interview, because, the podcast isn't up anymore. But if I can, I'll send it to you guys. I'll upload it to like a shared Google folder or something like that. But he talks about that. He was like, I wasn't expecting all these people from all these factions of classical education. Like, that wasn't his orientation towards this. He wasn't like the classical education renewal guy. Like, that wasn't his thing. He was his question classic readings on what it means to be an educated human being, that's what he was concerned with. And so it's interesting to see how he entered into it from that perspective. I find it fascinating and a breath of fresh air, to be quite honest. But yeah. So one of the things that it makes me think of is with that, like in sport and in earnest, so play and rigor, but it also makes me think back to the divided line in that first part of the divided line, the images which our imagination perceives. Play is at that level. And I think it redeems that, because I think one of the things I notice as a temptation, especially in classical education, is because we have this ideal of the ultimate form. We have this like ideal. We want to just go there and think we can just like jump there and just start doing that or seeing that or being that or thinking that, and so then I think the ideal of that oftentimes is translated in, and of course, like that, it's a whole different conversation, but I think that sometimes we forget what the process is to get there. And being in the realm of images is not a bad thing. It's not bad. It's not wrong. It's not like negative and then the intuition and eternal forms are positive. Like, it's not a positive, negative sort of thing. It's a spectrum. It's a milestones. They're milestones. They're faculties. They're different ways of knowing and experiencing the world around us. Sometimes, why do you think Jesus taught in stories? And I think this is another reason to what he's saying about the importance of play and in the nursery, like proper training in the nursery, is the images that we're given in childhood affect how we view everything else. I mean, what happens to us as children between birth and 8? We have a lot set in us. And I mean, this is one of the tragedies of abuse, child abuse, is how that affects their moral imagination, and therefore then how they perceive the world is altered in a very significant, fundamental way. There's a sort of broken moral imagination there, which is a whole nother conversation. But I mean, yeah. Okay. Oh, and on bottom of 16, in that last paragraph, he says, so then he's like comparing two different kinds of education. So there's this one education, and they just kind of like rant. They just go off on it. They're like, well, if you can even call it that, I wouldn't even call that education. And okay, I'm so distracted. There's like an automatic filter that happens on Zoom, and it's like putting lips on me. And as I move around, my lips are moving around my face. I'm like, I didn't ask for this. What's happening? So
it was on your head.
So that's happening. But he's like, we're not even going to call that education. It's more like training. But this other education is what they're meaning by Paideia. So when they're using the term education in this text, the Greek word there would be Paideia. So they're talking about Paideia when they're talking about education here. And he says, but of the other education in virtue, from youth upwards, which makes a man eagerly pursue, to what you were asking about earlier, eagerly pursue the ideal perfection of citizenship, and teaches him how rightly to rule and how to obey, which is like the end of Paideia. It orders those desires. And yes, that's what I'll say. What else stood out to you in this? I'm so excited about the section on page 17. I love how it honored the feminine and the masculine in gymnastic and music. So the next thing, well, what did you think?
Well, I had a big question mark because again, I read this out loud to Brian because I was trying to, without any context of historically what was happening, I was trying to understand. Well, was he being funny when he talks about the competition and the boxing, basically calling it like, well, that's fruitless unless it's for building up of your strength, and it's ordered, and it is when he's talking about wrestling in particular. As regards, anyway, so I guess I have a big question mark behind it because I guess I just didn't understand. I couldn't get a mental picture of what he was actually describing.
Yeah, well, that's a good question. And it's 9:31 and I want to honor everyone's time, but I'll say this about it. So when I go back to the text and you look at the structure of that section on page 17, that whole section, he keeps going back to this comparison with war and what's beneficial in peace and in war. So and then he ties it together with that last line: for these sorts of exercises and no others are useful both in peace and war and are beneficial alike to states and to private houses. I feel like that's pointing to he's not being cheeky. He's being serious. Now, that doesn't mean if somebody was performing it, he might not say it in a playful way. Maybe that's what you're picking up on. But I feel like the text tells, this is like a point he's trying to make about these types of things. So in this section, since he's talking about gymnastic and music, and he divides gymnastic into wrestling and dance as the two forms for strengthening the body. But what he says that it does is that it aims at preserving dignity and freedom. And the other aims at producing health, agility, and beauty in the limbs and the parts of the body, giving proper flexion and extension to each of them, a harmonious motion being diffused everywhere and forming a suitable accompaniment to the dance. And then he goes on talking later. He says, working with energy and constancy. And what struck me so much about that is this is the first time we learn the limits and possibility of our being and the beings of other people. Like, I totally get why this is the foundation now because of this. Like, I mean, I don't want to keep us on past 9:30, but he's really showing us that this is the foundation, the first example of knowing my limits and how to rule myself, and knowing what it's like the first rhetoric. It's like, how can you persuade me and how can I persuade you? Isn't that what dancing is? Somebody leads and somebody follows. Wrestling, same thing. They're interacting with two people, but you're doing it in the body. And notice it's being done in the body, physical. I mean, and that even parallels with I'm just beginning to think about it. So I'm in curiosity stage with it. But but something's happening in the body first that gives us a framework for feeling out and knowing how to be that way in other places. It serves as a living metaphor later on to know our limits and possibilities and how to interact with other people. But I will stop there. It's going to be like this every month, isn't it? Completely dissatisfying, because we'll end and have so much more to talk about. It's all right. I think every single classical education conference, talk, or book club, somebody says something like that at every single one of them, every time.
Well, it's so true. I mean, we could just keep going on and on. We didn't even talk about the lady part. I loved that part as well. Just his inclusion and respect. And I read that one portion to Ryan where it talks about you shouldn't write about somebody basically until they die. But once they have lived their full life, if they've run their course in virtue, praise should be given equally to both men and women. And so in the same way, he offers that, offers this opportunity for women to have their strength be attuned in the same fashion. So anyway, I like that.
Yeah. Well, and if you want to continue the conversation, there's the Facebook group on fellows. You know, we have our fellows chat, but the Facebook group, you're more than welcome to continue it there. But this has been delightful.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. And so next month, we'll be reading Philo. Yes. So
thanks, Jennifer.
You're welcome. Y'all have a great one.
Thank you so much. Have a good night.
My pleasure. Bye.
Bye.